If you were a gamer that grew up in the 80s, the 90s, and even to a lesser extent the early 2000s, I believe many of us hold the Game Boy family of systems near and dear to our hearts. See, I got my first Game Boy back in 1999, and here it is, still in working condition. And the Game Boy Color, when I got this, was at the height of the Pokémon craze. But I was kind of late to the game because the Game Boy family of systems started with the original Game Boy back in 1988, 1989 if I'm not mistaken, and lasted all the way up through the Game Boy Micro, which I believe ceased production in like 2005, 2006. I never had a Game Boy Micro, but I did have a Game Boy Advance, which I got back in 2002. And I'm excited to share my collection with you guys today for one specific reason. I don't actively collect for the Game Boy family. And maybe that's a disservice to myself because I know the Game Boy has a huge library of games and a lot of games that stayed on the Game Boy. And one of the other reasons that I'm excited to show this, aside from the fact that I don't collect, is because a lot of these games that I'm going to show here today, granted it's only like a handful of them, are games that I got when I was a kid. So because I don't actively collect for this like I do for the other systems, I kind of have stories behind each of these games and memories behind them because I played them when I was 8, 9 years old all the way till I was about 14. Starting with the story behind my first Game Boy Color. See, my neighbor had a Game Boy Color and it was in the height of the Pokemon craze, and I was always trying to play his Game Boy because he had Pokemon Red, and I loved the show. I just never had a Game Boy of my own. And that all changed in the summer of 1999 when I spent a weekend at my aunt and uncle's house in New York, and my parents made some kind of agreement with me where if I was good for that weekend, they would buy me a Game Boy Color and a Pokemon game. And red was always my favorite color, so this was kind of the closest they could get to like a red Game Boy, and they bought me Pokemon Blue because my neighbor had red so we could trade together. I was, thinking back, kind of confused in modern time because I was never like a rambunctious kid. I was always on my best behavior to my knowledge, so the fact that they made that bet with me to just be a good kid and you'll get a Game Boy made it seem like I was gonna get it either way. Going to my Game Boy Advance, the story behind this was my cousin actually got his Game Boy Advance for his birthday in the year 2001. At that point, I didn't even know there was a Game Boy Advance. Like, I wasn't a full-on, like, up-and-up gamer. I had a Game Boy, I had a PS1, and that summer, I had gotten an N64 as a gift for getting the honor roll all 4 working periods in 3rd grade, it was. And it's funny, because I got my N64, like, right on the cusp of the GameCube coming out, which just shows, like, how late into the game I was with a lot of things. My PS1 I got actually relatively close to release time, because I believe I got that in, like, 1996. But anyway, we were going on a trip to Arkansas in 2002, and I wanted a Game Boy Advance because I wanted to have something newer to play because we drove. And from Jersey to Arkansas, that was quite a long drive. So this was right after my birthday, so I had Toys R Us gift cards that I used to buy the Game Boy Advance. And the 2 games that I bought get an honorable mention here today because I traded them in back in like 2004. And those were Crash Bandicoot, The Great Adventure. Being a PlayStation kid, I needed a Crash game. And it was Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. I look back and I wish I never traded them in, but back in the day, I really didn't care if I traded games in to get other games, because the game that I traded them in for is still here today, and I will show that. But yeah, those were my first 2 games, and it was funny because I remember I wasn't really into them, so that whole trip to Arkansas, I was playing my Game Boy Color games. But with that being said, you know, I'm happy that I still have these 2 systems here today, but let's take a look at the game collection, because it's only a handful of games, as I mentioned, but a lot of them, they're gems. So let's take a look. So, to start off, I want to look at my Game Boy Color games, because it was my earliest venture into the Game Boy line of systems. With that being said, the first game I want to show is Rampart. Now, I think I was stupid when I bought this game because I don't like this game, really at all. But I always kept it because it was a game I got early from Toys R Us, I remember, in the Game Boy lifespan. I think I thought this game was like a version of Rampage, like the game where you just go as monsters and destroy buildings, because I used to always rent that on the PlayStation 1, and I thought probably they were somehow related because I'm pretty sure Midway has something to do with both of them. But Rampart is more of like, if I remember correctly, like a castle breaking game, or like an army game, and I was never really into those as a kid. Huh. Next on the list, Mr. Chun's Gourmet Paradise. This game I actually have never played, but what's funny about it is I found this in my uncle's backyard when him and my cousin, or when me and my cousin were hiking back there one day, because he has like a huge yard, and I just happened to notice it like chilling behind the fence, and no one knows where this game came from. I had been guessing it was there for like years, so of course like he got rid of his Game Boy, so I just kind of took it, and I don't think I've ever actually put that in. Another great game that I remember so much is Bomberman GB. This is Bomberman, obviously, for the Game Boy. I got this game also early on, probably in 1999, early 2000, if anything. And I specifically remembering playing this game so much and getting through like the first couple stages and loving it. And then once it got harder, I couldn't figure out how to like solve the Bomberman puzzles. And I remember we were in some kind of office because my dad was trying to sell something that he had that was valuable, like a collector's item, so we were trying to, I guess, gauge what the value of it was, but that's besides the point. I just remember sitting on the couches in that office playing this game for like 3 hours and continuously shutting off my Game Boy to restart it just so I can get to parts that I could beat. Next, we have WWF Betrayal. Now, I actually got this game Christmas Day 2001, I believe. And I thought this was such a weird game because I had never read anything about it leading up to it, because I wasn't big on like reading video game news in the early 2000s. So I had thought this was going to be just like a wrestling game. Lo and behold, it's a beat 'em up game where you have to save like Vince's daughter, Stephanie, and it's like really weird. I remember beating it on the way to my grandparents' house for Christmas. It's not a long game. I actually liked it at the time, even though I was kind of betrayed, no pun intended, for thinking that it was going to be like an actual wrestling game like SmackDown 2, which I was in love with at the time. Next up is Miss Pac-Man. Now, this game actually was my sister's. See, she had a green Game Boy, which I'm still trying to figure out where that went to, and she had 2 games for it. Another one's coming up. Miss Pac-Man was one of them. And we bought her Game Boy at like a weird store in the mall that I don't think exists anymore. And I don't think it was like a video game store. Like, I don't think it was like a Funko-Land or like a Babbage's. I forgot where we got it. But she had Miss Pac-Man, which I don't think she played much of. I don't think I've played much of Miss Pac-Man on the Game Boy either. But, you know, it's a classic. Next is Mario Golf. Now, this was actually my cousin's game as well, and I ended up getting this years ago because he was just purging his whole video game collection because he doesn't really game as much anymore. So, you know, I remember playing this with him as a kid, and of course, like, when he was getting rid of everything, I took some Dreamcast games and N64 games as well, but of course I had to take Mario Golf because even though I was probably 17 when he got rid of his collection, I remembered playing this when we were like 7 or 8, so the nostalgia factor was like, okay, let me take that one. This was my sister's other game, Game & Watch Gallery 3. I loved this game, and she did too, actually, because it was like a compilation of old Game & Watch games, as you could, you know, take note of, but you could play it in like a new modern way, or you could play the game retroly, like how it would have been on the Game & Watch. And I remember switching through both modes of each game because based on like how you played it, whether it was like the modern version or the old way, it felt like it was two different games just because of the graphical style. And a lot of them, I think, were changed a little bit to make them more modern. But her and I used to like swap this game all the time just because it was so addicting. Because it was like mini arcade games and Game & Watch handheld games. So you can get a lot of fun out of it just by trying to beat the high scores. This game, Mega Man. This is actually my second copy of this game, for the sheer fact that I left my first copy in like a Florida hotel room in like 2003. Now, the Mega Man games for the Game Boy are very different than the ones for the NES, and I remember at the time I didn't like this game because I thought it was so hard, right? I was not very good at old school Mega Man games, and I was used to playing like the Battle Network series or like the Legend series, which neither of them are inherently classic Mega Man. So I was distraught when I left this game in Florida when we were there overnight because our flight got delayed. And I must have swapped it out for another game and then just like left this on like a head or like a dresser next to the bed. So years later, like if I'm not going to say I started collecting again just to get this game, but I knew like I had this game at one point, so if I got it for a decent price, I was going to pick it back up. Pokémon Crystal. This game made me get my first job. And I say that, but it was a lemonade stand. See, my parents had this agreement with me that I could get this game if I could find a way to raise half of the money to get it. As a 8-year-old kid, or 9-year-old kid when this came out, I don't think they thought I was going to be able to find a way to get the money, because I legally couldn't be employed, so they thought they were like off the hook with buying it for me. But lo and behold, after we made that bet, the next morning I raised about $25 out of, I think, the 35 to 40 that this was at the time. And I showed it to my parents, and they were astounded, so we went and pre-ordered this game. And Crystal has actually gone up in price in recent years, so I'm happy that like I made that bet as a little kid. And I just loved this game because it was so different than Silver and Gold, because it added the unknown decks to it. And I remember specifically waking up at certain points of the night because certain things in this game you could see based on the clock in the game at one of like the mountain areas. And I would just wake up at like 4:30 in the morning just to see if I could catch the Pokemon that would show up or whatnot. And I personally believe that the Johto games are better than the original, because even going into the next game, which is my original Pokemon Silver, you had 2 games in here. Because once you beat the Johto League, you can go back to Kanto and face all the gym leaders and see how much that world has changed since the original series, like since Gen 1. Silver, I got because, so my dad used to work for FedEx, and one of his routes was the mall. And at the time, he was friends with the guys at Babbage's. So they actually put the pre-order down or something like that for me for this game, because I had been playing the Japanese version on an emulator, and I had no idea what was happening, and at that point there were no like fan translations, and this was the beginning or the summer of 2000. And when I heard this was finally getting released, I was like, I have to get the American version. And I played the heck out of this game. I remember getting Suicune in this game and wasting my Master Ball on Suicune. But it was fine, because I ended up using Suicune so much for like my own deck, and I traded that. I think I traded everyone from Silver up to Crystal when I got it, so I kind of had like a little bit of a jump start for certain Pokemon. And also, going into a game I'm going to show in a couple of minutes, I had a Mew that I would transfer all the way up. So let's go to my next game. The Pokemon trading card game. I got this in, I think, the summer of '99 also, and I don't want to say I was disappointed in this game, because I thought it was going to play like the other Pokemon games, and it didn't. You kind of just had like an overworld map that would put you in a gym, and you would collect the cards by beating the trainers, and then, you know, just attempt to beat the game. I was actually addicted to this game for a while because I got so hooked into just the simplicity of it. And I also learned from this game in particular that I had no idea how to play the trading card game in real life, because me and my friends were not following the rules at all at 8 years old. And this game kind of taught me how to play the Pokemon trading card game. Interesting game. It's made by a different developer than Game Freak, so that makes a lot of sense why it played differently. But I think this is on NSO now, Nintendo Switch Online, so it's definitely worth playing for an interesting Pokemon if you've never played it. Next, Pokemon Yellow. Now, I kind of mucked this game up and my Pokemon Blue, because as a kid, I thought cleaning a cartridge involved putting it under water. So the label got all messed up, and this was the game I actually got my Mew in. So, in the summer of 2000, Nintendo was running the Pokemon 2000 Stadium Tour, and it hit a mall by me. So one Sunday afternoon, we were visiting one of my relatives up in North Jersey, and my dad took me to the mall, and I'm not sure, to be honest, if I had to have won the tournament to get Mew, because I didn't even play the tournament. I kind of just got in line where they had like this kiosk where you would put your cartridge in and they would transfer Mew to it. So I ended up getting Mew from that. Like, I didn't do the hack to get Mew that a lot of people do. It was an actual legitimate Mew, which was always cool. And I ended up transferring Mew all the way up to, I think, Fire Red. And it's probably still sitting in there, if we're being honest. I haven't powered that game up in forever. So, Yellow I loved because Pikachu would follow you. It was the most anime-based game that we had at that point that felt like the TV show. And you know, you could talk to Pikachu and you can get little emotions out of him. It was awesome. And then there was a way to catch the surfing Pikachu also, but I never did that. And I think you had to have like a special version of like Pokemon Yellow I had heard that had that in it, but it was only like a select cartridges. I don't know if I'm just believing a rumor that I heard or if there was an actual legitimate way to get the surfing Pikachu, but I never got him. And that brings us, coincidentally, to the last Game Boy game I want to show you guys, but the first one I ever had, and that is my original Pokemon Blue. Now, I probably haven't held this cartridge in forever, and I'm wondering why both of these have tape on them, on the label. Now, this is another one where I tried to clean it with water, but I don't know if I did that to keep the label on, or if I was going to write my name on the back of them, because we ended up writing my name on the back, which like we used to do back in the day, so we knew whose games were who, but not on the tape, just on the actual cartridge, which is interesting. Now, Pokemon Blue, I put so much time into this game, especially because during that time, I was switching between Blue and Yellow, just to kind of play different games, but almost the same game at the same time. And I think Pokemon Blue was what I was playing at the time where Pokemon the Movie 2000 came out. It was either that or it was Yellow. But I put so much time into this game. Like, if I were to... If the battery in this possibly by any chance still works, I probably would have put like 100 hours into this game. This game was the game that I got the Pokemon... I mean, not Pokemon, the Game Boy Light for, which was like because the Game Boy Color wasn't backlit, it was like a little spotlight that I would play in the middle of the night, and you could really not see anything on the screen. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why part of me has awful eyesight, but, you know, it's so weird actually holding this cartridge again, because it's kind of just been sitting on my shelf for years. Same with Yellow. And to know these are actually, like, aside from the mucked up label, I could probably clean these because, like, the cartridge itself doesn't look super in awful shape. I would love to probably get new batteries in these and power these up like one more time for another playthrough. But that is my Game Boy and Game Boy Color collection. Let's move on to the Game Boy Advance games. Boot into the Game Shark cheat menu first, and if it was off, it would just boot the cartridge. Now, I don't know if Game Shark is even a company anymore, but I haven't seen any of their devices in God knows how long, and to me, it's a sign of the times, you know? Like, I felt like so many people had the Game Shark, the Action Replay, and you just, for better or worse, don't see it anymore. Now, I already kind of showed this game as my little demonstration, but this is Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX. I got this game back in the summer of 2002 for a trip that we took to Tennessee. And, you know, my family, we used to drive a lot of places for vacation. I think it was because my dad liked driving, and it was probably also cheaper in 2002 versus getting on a plane. And I played the heck out of this game on that ride because I was a big fan of the Tony Hawk series. So, you know, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX, it seemed like a fun sports game to just kind of have on the go. With that being said, for Christmas of 2002, I got the remake of A Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Four Swords. I was never super into Zelda at this point, and nowadays I adore the Legend of Zelda series. See, the reason I got this game was because my mother went to GameStop, or it was EB Games at the time, and asked them, according to her, what was a popular game to get my son for Christmas for the Game Boy, because I had just gotten my Game Boy that previous spring. And they told her, Link to the Past. Now, in retrospect, that was a fine recommendation by the GameStop employee. However, I only got so far into this game as a kid and never ended up beating it until I beat it on the Super Nintendo back in 2014. But as one of my early Game Boy Advance games, I was all for having this. And it was just so fun, even though I kind of sucked at it. One game I also played the heck out of was WWE WrestleMania 18. Well, Road to WrestleMania 18. Now, this was a handheld version, kind of like, not of the GameCube WrestleMania 18, but it was its own little thing where it was like a 2D wrestling game that kind of actually brought itself back to how like the old WWF Raw or WrestleMania the arcade game kind of was on the Super Nintendo. It was a fun game. You had a very limited roster, but as a wrestling fan at the time, this was the game I kind of wanted WWF Betrayal to be, and I played hours and hours into this game. Going to Zelda again, The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. Now, this actually wasn't even my game. I had borrowed this from my one friend, and when I asked like when he wanted it back, he told me just to keep it, which was odd because I borrowed this and Phantom Hourglass from him because I didn't have a DS, and he just wanted those two back, but he told me I could keep the Minish Cap. So, alright. I've never actually fully played through Minish Cap, and I kind of want to because it seems like it's a fun game, and I know a lot of people enjoy this game. This Sports Illustrated Kids Football. I did not like this game. Now, I grew up liking the Blitz kind of series of games. They're very arcadey football sports games. The same with Slugfest, right? So my grandmother actually bought me for this for Christmas one year. And, you know, she didn't know any better of what a good game was, but I was just so grateful that, you know, she bought me a video game. So this I don't think is actually an awful game, but it's just not my type of football game. And I hold this game now dear and dear to my heart because I was so close to my grandmother, so it's one of the memories I have of her. Let's go into this. Spyro, Season of Ice. As mentioned earlier, I grew up as a PlayStation 1 kid, so when I saw Spyro on the Game Boy, I had to get it. It was the same reason why I wanted to get Crash Bandicoot The Great Adventure, because they were PS1 series. So I don't also think I ever beat this game. That was a time in my life where I really didn't beat games I bought. I would play them, and if I couldn't get past them, I would stop playing them forever. This game probably hasn't been in my Game Boy since 2004. The first Pokemon game I got for the Game Boy Advance was Pokemon Ruby. And I loved this game. This game was such a big up from like the Johto series in a way because it had so many more things going for it. I remember you could like I think throw your Pokemon in like contests in this game and see if they could win. There was a lot of like adventure to this game, and Ruby to this day. I remember I used to play this in 5th grade, and we weren't allowed to have Game Boys in school, and I would sneak it in just to play it, just to get my Game Boy taken away. But speaking of another reddish Pokemon game, I mentioned this earlier, Pokemon Fire Red. This game was the one I bought to trade in Crash Bandicoot Great Adventure and Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge to get Fire Red. I do somewhere still have the wireless adapter for this game where you could plug it into the Game Boy, and it was like online wireless gaming without the need of the link cable. I got Fire Red not only because red was my favorite color at the time, but because I had blue growing up. I felt like it was kind of cool to actually have the remake of Red. The next couple games kind of tie into each other because it's the Mega Man Battle Network series. I loved Battle Network growing up. I played probably weeks, like in total, in so many of these games. And the only one I don't have is Battle Network 6, which I probably should get because recently I did pick up Battleship Challenge. That's probably the latest Game Boy game I got. But 6 deserves to be here, and I do have it in the Battle Network collection. So eventually I think I will finally add that to the game. And they were just like cool because you went into cyberspace, you got to live this whole different kind of dimension of the Mega Man universe, and then you could get out of cyberspace and you were just this kid with his friends that were going to school, and the game had like, they kind of reminded me of Persona to an extent looking back to it, right? Because you could have your life and then you would go into this whole other dimension, and it was awesome. Like, I recommend the Battle Network series to so many people who have never played it and want a different kind of dimension of Mega Man because it was very lighthearted, kind of cheesy, kind of corny, and I know the series in itself doesn't always get the love that I think it deserves. And I remember when they were releasing all the different Mega Man collections, I kept telling my one friend at work, please give me the Battle Network collection. That's all I want. And then they finally announced it, and I pre-ordered it the moment I could. Now, I saved this game for last. This is Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hands. And I did for a specific reason. See, Boktai is produced by Konami, which isn't Capcom. However, there was a crossover that went on for a little while between Boktai and the Battle Network series, where you would actually get one of the weapons that the character in Boktai uses. It was like the Gundel Soul or something like that. That was a freaking amazing and cheap weapon in Battle Network that I won many fights with that pretty much just drained your opponent's life. Now, in Boktai, this cartridge itself is very, very interesting because there's actually like a sun sensor here that's like a solar panel almost, where you would have to be in the sun for the most part to actually power up your weapon. And it was a very unique game. I know they came out with like a second one, and it was, I think, kind of valuable looking back to it. But I got this game specifically because I became familiar with the character from the Battle Network series. And I need to finally finish playing through this. But it's a weird combination of just how they made that tie-in. But it worked. It was a very cool tie-in. It added a little bit of a difference to the Battle Network series. It, going back to, mentioning Persona earlier, it kind of made me feel, in retrospect, of how Dante was in SMT Nocturne. Cool crossovers back in the day that you don't really see much of now. So there you go, guys. That's just a glimpse into my collection for my Game Boy Color and my Game Boy Advance. I know I should probably be collecting more for these two systems because the library is very expansive. So what are your favorite games from that era of gaming, the Game Boy family of games? That's a lot of games in that sentence. But leave them down below. What do you think I should pick up and give a chance for these systems? What memories do you have for these systems? At what special points of your life do you remember playing the Game Boy? Your childhood, maybe even into your teenage years. And what significance does it have to you? I want to know all that down in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching, guys, and sticking with me. Like, share, and subscribe for more video game content and kind of just content from all over the place. Until next time, game on. I'll see ya. Bye.